Welcome to our Finish Strong podcast, a production of Fearless Faith Ministries. I'm Terry Steen. Usually, I have my cohorts with me, Dan and Brian. Some reason they're not around. You know, you just can't get good help anymore. But anyhow, I'm going to go ahead and start. Can't wait on those guys. Maybe they'll show up. I'm excited tonight. One of our guests for tonight's been involved in radio and television for 40 years. He's interviewed hundreds of celebrities, including Hall of Fame athletes, actors, recording artists. It's going to be a fun podcast.
I've been looking everywhere for that Wheeler guy. I can't find him. So,
hey, Brian, you made it.
Oh, have you already started?
Yes.
Oh, well, then let me tell the folks that in the special edition of Finish Strong, our guest is going to share several fascinating stories and talk about the many lessons that they learned along the way. So stay tuned to hear about, let's see, there's Mickey Mantle, there's Charlton Heston. Anybody remember Nadia Comaneci? Hey, she was great, wasn't she? That's just a few.
Yeah.
So stay tuned.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. By this time, I'm sure many of you know who our special guest is. He's a legend in his own mind. Welcome, Dan Wheeler. Oh, here he comes. Here he comes.
Oh, gosh, I'm sorry,
There he
guys.
is.
Sorry, I'm late. Did I miss anything?
Finally.
Oh, yeah, I'm the guest, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Man, I'm
And
sorry.
we were panicking. I thought I was going to have to just read or tap dance or juggle or something.
Well, you guys gave me the wrong time.
You were just in your other office, we know.
Yeah.
It's going to be fun because rarely do we get to do this kind of thing and interview you. But Dan, all joking aside, you've had an incredible career and future, and it's been a privilege for Brian and I to work with you. And you spent the last 29 years of your television career with QVC. How did you land the job, the on-air job in the first place?
Well, it's funny. I started out of college. I got a job at a local ABC station, the same one that Brian had worked at years before. And I was the sportscaster, but there weren't a lot of big name athletes coming through Springfield, Missouri. So I kind of got tired of interviewing every college coach, 5 times. And then, Christian television came calling, went to Channel 38, and Brian was there. And I learned about running camera and lighting and audio. And then we had this thing called telethons. You remember, Brian?
Oh, Lord, do it.
Oh, I do too.
Yes, that's right. Terry was at PTL. And so we were raising money for Channel 38, and that got me used to live TV. And I had an agent in town that would send me on, various commercial and industrial auditions. And they sent me on this audition, and I didn't have a clue what it was about. They said, I got up there and they said, okay, sell us this ladder. And I said, is this a commercial? And they said, no, not really. And I said, is there a script? And they said, no, just wing it. And I was better at winging it than I was at trying to act and deliver a script. And I got the job, and it was America's Shopping Place. And one of my co-hosts were Kendi Klepfer at the time, Kendi Waller now, and a lady named Jane Lynch, who's was on Glee, and she's done many movies, and she's big in Hollywood.
Yeah.
And then when that program stopped, I had a company with a partner in Chicago, and I kept getting a call from the studios where we did the show saying, there's all these networks, shopping networks that want to talk to you. And I go, what do you mean shopping networks? And they said, apparently there's these big networks that do what we were doing with America's Shopping Place. I said, you're kidding me. I said, well, that was a fad. It'll never make it. Then the guy from CVN kept calling every Friday, and he would offer me more money every week. And finally I said, I got to go to Minnesota and check this out. I went to CVN, was there like a year and 3 months, and then they were bought out by QVC. And at the time, QVC only took 4 girl hosts. Mary Beth Rowe, who was on our last podcast, was one of them. And then I went out there and kind of trained the hosts on a product. I had done a point of purchase on something. And anyway, the senior VP followed me out of the host lounge and asked me where he was. Could he have my phone number? And then he called me like not even 2 weeks later and said, we need to audition you. And I went out and got the audition, and I remember driving out to QVC saying, Lord, if this job could just last 3 years, I could get some paid off and I could get on my feet. And 29 years later, I retired and formed this with you guys.
Yeah.
Wow.
So even before I left QVC. So that was it.
That's pretty amazing, Dan. Let's start out at QVC. You went through the shopping thing and CVN. You were a little confused one time. There was a funny moment, weren't you? Confused by your producer, if I remember right.
Right, Brian. Well, live TV.
Right.
Our producers would always talk to us during the whole show. And Dave King and I were selling an NFL jacket, and it was a 3/4 length jacket. And we were having some fun saying, yeah, I like this jacket. It covers the caboose. And he'd say, yeah, the bootay. And we're going back and forth, the bootissimus. And then we just had a little fun, different words for your backside. And then we moved on to something else. And all of a sudden my producer says in my ear, derriere. And I thought he meant we had a phone call, because that's the producer usually will let you know we had a phone call. And Dave was talking. I go, Dave, excuse me. We have a phone call. Hello, derriere. And nothing. And I go, derriere, are you there? And the producer goes, man, what are you doing? There's no phone call named derriere. And I just started laughing, and Dave started laughing. I thought, who names their daughter derriere? What a lovely name. Derriere, are you there? So, but I had many moments like that.
Oh, I'm sure you did. But I can't imagine anybody who's, for all the time I've known you and heard all the different people that you've had a chance to literally sit down and have conversation with and talk to, that has celebrity status, that came through the doors of that place. Let's start talking about a few of these. Let's go to the great Mickey Mantle. I know you had a couple opportunities to talk with him, and there's a pretty pointed story there, isn't there?
Yeah, guys, you're all sports lovers like I am, and I couldn't believe I'd be sitting with all these Hall of Famers and celebrities and actors and things. I thought, what am I doing here? But it was amazing. God gave me a front row seat. So Mickey Mantle, the first time I worked with him, I was actually with CVN, and we were doing a live remote from his New York City restaurant, Mickey Mantle's restaurant. And before the show, they had it all roped off, and there were a lot of people there. And I was walking towards Mickey, and Whitey Ford and Billy Martin were sitting at a booth in the back.
Wow.
And a guy was standing there with a Yankees cap on, a little boy with a Yankees cap and a baseball. And the father grabbed me by the arm and said, Dan, would you have Mickey sign this baseball? I mean, he's our hero. We just love him. And boy, what a family heirloom. And I'd never worked with Mickey. In fact, this was my first major sports show, and I was kind of naive. And I said, sure, I'll ask him. So I go back there and I asked Mickey if he'd sign the baseball. And he called me every name in the book. I mean, he was swearing. He was, it was almost like his head was spinning. I said, Mickey, okay, I'll never ask again. I'm sorry. So I go back to this little boy and this father, and I'm thinking, what am I going to tell them? They love Mickey Mantle. So I said, Mickey feels bad. I figured that was true. He was just cursing at me. I said, but he can't sign this baseball because he's selling his signature for money today, and the memorabilia company is here. So he apologizes. And they said, oh, thanks. We know he would if he could. And I thought, wow, gosh, I kind of told a little fib there. I had to ask the Lord to forgive me, but I just didn't want to destroy their image of Mickey. Well, I worked with Mickey probably 6 or 7 times after that. And he was always difficult to work with because we always had to have another guest on with him, because he would always have a 7 and 7 drink on the set. And he'd be drinking throughout. And after an hour, he was almost comatose. He'd hardly say anything. So, always difficult. And so the last time I worked with him, he had just come out of Betty Ford. And you see, Mickey had 2 sons that died. One died at 35 and the other died at 45, Mickey Jr. and David, and Billy. And so the only way Mickey knew how to communicate with his kids was to have a drink, to go out drinking. And he was an alcoholic. And so I get a call in the dressing room from the security. Mickey's here, but I got to warn you, he's mad as a hornet. And I said, what now? Calm him down. I'll be right down. So I'm walking down thinking, this guy, what a pain. And I go into the green room and I'm talking really fast. I said, Mickey, I hear you were given the wrong time. Oh, he said he was given the wrong time, the security guard, and he could only stay for 1 hour. It was a 3-hour show. I said, I'm sorry. We'll take whatever you can get. I'll do the rest of the show myself. And he starts laughing. And he looks at the security guard and he's laughing. I'm thinking, I'm really confused. He hits me on the shoulder and he goes, oh, pard, I'm just kidding with you. I'm here for the whole 3 hours. Pard was short. He's from Oklahoma, partner.
Yeah.
And I knew he only called people pard that he really liked and only pulled practical jokes on people he really liked. And I didn't think I fell into either category. And then he says, Dan, can I talk to you in private? And I said, sure. So the security guard left. We go into the makeup area there in the green room. And I go in first and he walks behind me. He closed the door. Well, he turns around and tears are literally rolling down his face. And I said, Mickey, is everything okay? And he goes, well, I owe you the biggest apology in the world. And I go, for what? He goes, look, Dan, he goes, I'm an alcoholic. And I remember when you asked me to sign that baseball and I went off on you. And I said, you remember that? I mean, this was like 9 years later.
Wow.
And he said, yeah. And he said, I got to tell you something. Do you know why I hated signing autographs? I said, no, why? He said, because I had no self-esteem. He said, I thought, why would people want my autograph? I'm nothing but an alcoholic. I said, and you happen to be the greatest hitter on the greatest sports franchise of all time. And people kind of worship. He goes, but I felt like a fraud. He said, I was invited. IBM paid me $60,000 to show up for a half hour at their Christmas party. He goes, I meet the president of IBM, a guy named Thomas Watson. He goes, and he starts crying and telling me I'm his hero and he can't believe he's meeting me. I felt like the biggest fraud. I'm thinking, but you're smart. You created, so what? I could hit a baseball. I'm nothing but an alcoholic.
Wow.
But Mickey realized that. And, you know, later on that year, it was announced, this was the last year. No, this was May of 94. In 95, it was announced he needed a liver. And then I was on vacation with my wife, Beth, and our 2 daughters in the Pocono Mountains. And I turned on the TV and I saw Mickey jogging the bases and I knew he had passed. And the voiceover said, the great Mickey Mantle passed away today. But I found out that he accepted the Lord before he died. Bobby Richardson, and I heard this from Bobby Richardson himself. He said, Mickey called him into it. He was in a hospital in Dallas. He said, Bobby, I'm dying and I need to talk to you. And Bobby said, I walk into a room and Mickey has this little boyish grin on his face and says, come here. He said, his voice was real soft. He goes, guess what I did? And Bobby said, what? He said, I gave my life to Jesus Christ. I'm going to heaven.
I love it.
And Bobby had prayed for him his whole life. And Bobby said, I made sure he understood what salvation meant. And he was saved. I went to the Bible and he goes, he was saved. He was changed. And I was like, wow. But, you know, I think of Mickey and I think of, you know, his whole life. He felt like he wasted. And, you know, I mean, people still remember him. He was great, but he's gone. And, you know, now they're talking about Shohei Ohtani and all these people who are the greatest, you know. There's always going to be somebody better, always somebody. Right. But Mickey, I always say that, you know, he made it into the eternal Hall of Fame, a better one than Cooperstown, New York.
Yeah.
So that was an interesting story, but I thought, my gosh, I'm sitting here with Mickey Mantle and he's telling me he has no self-esteem. I thought, wow.
I think he still holds the record from 3.2 seconds from home plate to first base.
Fastest time ever. But then he ruined his knee. His rookie year, he wrecked his knee. There was a drainage plate in Yankee Stadium out in the outfield. He was running. Willie Mays hit a line shot between him and Joe DiMaggio in the World Series. And he said, I'm on my horse, because Casey Stengel had said, get whatever you can. And he said, the old Italian can't run anymore. He goes, I'm going as fast as I can. All of a sudden, I hear DiMaggio. I've got it. He said, I slammed on the brakes. He caught his cleat as he turned in that great, ripped his knee up. And there was no arthroscopic surgery, so he died in the pain with alcohol. So, but sad story, but it had a happy ending.
Yeah. And people might not know Bobby Richardson was a second baseman on those great teams too. So he was always witnessing to the other players.
Mickey,
I'm
Bobby,
glad-
and Whitey were always going out drinking. And Bobby,
Yeah.
they'd ask him, he said, no, they called him Goody Two Shoes. He was a Christian. Mickey told me a story. One time they'd all been out partying, he, Whitey, and Billy. And he was on the injured reserve list. And Whitey wasn't pitching. And Billy was out too. I think he was. And then he said, I'm down at the end sleeping with my cap pulled down, literally. All of a sudden, Whitey elbows me and says, the coach just said, you're up next. He goes, he can't play me. I'm on the DL. And Casey heard him and said, I don't think it was Casey.
Ralph Hoke, wasn't it?
It was Ralph
Hoke.
Hoke. Yeah. And he said, I took you off before the game. You're on deck. And Mickey said, I went up there and I had to shake off the cobwebs. He said, I couldn't even take a practice swing. He said, I step in the plate. Here comes a fastball and I see 3 of them. He said, so I swing at the one in the middle. He said, the worst thing, I hit it out of the park. He goes, now I got to run the bases. He goes, I get through third and I think I'm not going to make it. I feel it coming up in my mouth. He goes, I hit home plate, went right for the tunnel and just puked my guts out. But can you imagine being that good?
Oh,
really? My goodness.
Aim for the one in the middle. That teaches you something right there.
Yeah.
I'm glad that you were able to get Hank Aaron to sign that ball for me, Dan. So, without any problems. So that's consolation. Now, I had the opportunity working with Evander Holyfield, and I thought that was great. And I know that you worked with George Foreman. And if I remember right, didn't you do a documentary with him?
I did. I produced a documentary when I was at Channel 38. I saw an article in Sports Illustrated about him and Ali, and how Ali had Parkinson's and how George was always watching out for him and how George loved the guy. And George was out of boxing and it said he was had a church. He was a preacher. And so I read about his dramatic conversion and I said, I got to do a documentary on him. And I don't know how I got his phone number. I must have called a dozen people and somehow I found myself on the phone with him. And I told him who I was and that I wanted to do a documentary on him. He's like, no. Nobody tells my story the right way. And I said, George, I'm a Christian and I will give you full editorial rights. I won't produce anything that you don't approve of. He said, man, I don't know. And he was still hemming and hawing. He goes, I said, George, I'm coming. And so he said, okay. So I took my crew down there. And the funny thing was, Harold Wheat, the general manager at TV 38, found out I was leaving and they decided they didn't have enough money to send us. So he called Don and asked Don if he knew where I was. And Don said, oh, I think he's gone already. And Don hung up and called me and said, get out of the building quick. He said, we're going to stop your documentary. So it almost did happen. Got down there, had a great time. And while we were sitting there after a day of taping with him, and he was 330 pounds at the time, but he still looked big. I mean, when he walked out, I still have this scene in my mind of he's wearing a big white cowboy hat because we went to his ranch which is like 4 hours north of where he lived, Humboldt, Texas, which is basically Houston. It was in Marshall, Texas. And so I put him through his paces that day. I had him jog down the street and I wanted to use it as a closing shot and zoom up into the Foreman road sign, Foreman Drive. And he said, okay, you want me to run that? He goes, you got one take. I can't jog it a second time. And so he did that. And then we're sitting there. He goes, you want to see where I train for my fights? I go, sure. Where is it? How far away? He goes, it's right there. And he pointed to this red barn. And he said, I haven't been in there in 8 years. And he opened the door and I had Wade recording and Dean Anderson there. And as we're walking in, the smell of atomic bomb hits you. He had jars of, muscle relaxant, and it just hits you like out of the blue. Yeah. There were wads of tape all over this boxing ring. He left it just as it was. Wow. And so we're recording. We slip into the ring and I start throwing a few punches with him. And he said, he started talking about a sport that was really good to him. And I said, by the way, you could beat Mike Tyson. He goes, what are you talking about? I said, I've studied your film, Joe Frazier. Tyson fights the same way. Little guy leads with his head. You bounced Frazier around the ring because you caught him with those uppercuts. You do the same thing with Tyson. Well, so we forgot about it. I produced it, and he was very happy with it, really pleased with it. And then he calls me about 2 weeks later and says, guess what? You inspired me. I'm going to pull a comeback. And he said, I want you to cover it, to document it. I said, great. Do you have any money? He goes, no. I go, neither do I. How am I going to do this? How am I going to come down and follow you and go to all your fights with the crew? He goes, didn't think about this. So I went to every person I knew that had money in Chicago, and they all laughed at me. Said, he's too fat. He's too old. I said, he's going to come back, claim the heavyweight championship of the book. Anyway, I wrote a book, Best Seat in the House, with a lot of great athlete story. George wrote the foreword to the book for me. And in it, he said that he'd met some tough opponents in the ring, but I was tough as any of them, because I wouldn't take no for an answer. And he said that I inspired him. And then I reconnected with him at QVC, and we sold his George Foreman grill. That's when I asked him to write the foreword to it. So he said, I'll write it, but I'm really not a writer. Could you write it and I'll approve it? So I did. And he changed one word.
Wow.
But
of course, just tragic that he's just recently passed.
Yeah, I was so sad when I found out. He was a great guy. And, he gave his life to the Lord. He had such a conversion. His cousins, I interviewed 3 of his cousins, well, his brother and 2 of his cousins, and they said, man, the George Foreman before, you wouldn't even want to know. He said he was such a mean, bad dude. And George told me in that documentary, he wanted to kill Joe Frazier in the ring. Yep. He said, I thought that would be so cool, and I'd be the greatest puncher.
Wow.
And, but they said afterwards, when he found the Lord, he was like a gentle teddy bear, hugging everybody, loving everybody. He really was changed. Great story.
You can see the difference. Wow. He came from the streets of Houston, I think, in the gangs too.
Yeah.
So just what a change.
He got into boxing through a youth program, and then went on to win the gold medal. And that picture of him with the little flag was iconic.
Yeah. So. Well, let's shift gears. We're going to have to pick up the pace, guys. Okay. Let's go into actors. Charlton Heston.
Yeah.
You had a chance to work with him. There was a little surprise that he provided.
Yeah. I met with him, and then I told him what was going to happen. And then I went in and went to makeup and came back. I came back out in the studio. I was out there about 15, 20 minutes before the show, and I see Charlton walking and talking, and he was practicing his open. He was reciting the 23rd Psalm because he was selling the Bible on tape or on video that he had narrated. And he practiced that thing like 11 or 12 times. Charlton Heston. And when he delivered it, he flipped 2 of the verses, because I caught it, but you'd never know. He was so smooth. But I thought, because, he, near the end, I guess, ended up having Alzheimer's or dementia, pretty serious. And I think this might have been a start. But I thought, if Charlton Heston works that hard for a QVC appearance, I got to put it all on the table. And it reminded me of the verse in Ecclesiastes 9:10 that says, whatsoever your hand findeth to do, do it with all your might. So I think the Lord wants excellence. And we talk about that a lot here in Fearless Faith with all the different ministries we do. But that's a good story.
That's a great one. Yeah.
Well, let's go from actors now to royalty, which you had the opportunity to work with, and then one took an interesting turn, didn't it?
Yeah, I used to train a lot of and work with a lot of the celebrities when they came in who had never been on QVC, because I had so many celebrities on with the sports and with the music and everything. So I go up. It was Sarah Ferguson, Fergie, Duchess of York, and we were scheduled to rehearse. And I walk into the studio, and there's probably 10 suits, vice presidents, executive vice presidents in there, and there's the crew, and then there's Fergie over in a corner talking to no one. And I said to a bunch of people, I said, "What's going on?" They go, "I don't know. She doesn't want to do the rehearsal. She doesn't understand QVC and doesn't understand why she needs to do this. She's had a lot of TV experience." And I said, "Okay, I want everybody out of the studio. Everybody, leave, go out." And I walked up to her and I said, "Hello, Duchess. It's an honor to meet you. And I'm Dan." And she says, "Hi. You can call me Sarah." And I said, "Sarah, what's going on?" She said, "Well, Dan, I don't know why I need to do this rehearsal." And I said, "Well, QVC is so different from other TV you've done. There's selling going on. There's people talking in your ear, and the host is going to take you in a lot of directions. So, it would really help to go through it." She goes, "Oh man," she goes, "I don't really want to." And I said, "You know what, Sarah? I don't either." I said, "I don't even want to be here." I said, "My wife is dying of cancer. She's home. And I hate being away from her. I've got limited time. I want to be home with her. But since they called me in, and since you're here, could we just try rehearsal? And she said, "Oh, Dan, absolutely. I'm so sorry." We did the rehearsal. I called her buddy back in, and all these vice presidents, "What did you say?" I said, "That's between Sarah and I, but we're all fine now." She did a great rehearsal, and afterwards she comes up, and you know how the British kiss. She says, "Thank you so much," and she was so kind and so nice. She said, "Will you be here tonight?" I said, "Yeah, I'm here till I get off the air at 10. And I said, "You go on at midnight, right?" She goes, "Yeah, could you come to my dressing room before you leave the building? I'll have something for you." I said, "Okay." So I go in there, and she gave me this envelope and said, "This is for your sweet wife. Tell her I'm praying for her. Tell her how sorry I am." And so I didn't open it. I took it home to Beth because Beth it was, her final year, probably the spring, and she died that fall. And Beth opens it, and there's this headshot of Fergie, and she wrote the nicest thing. "Beth, I hear you're the most wonderful, kind woman, and I met your husband, and I just want you to know that I'm pulling for you. And because you're going through a hard time, here's a booklet I enclosed. It was like Winchester Palace or some place where she had lived a long time, and it was all these beautiful colored pictures, and she wrote a note on every page to Beth. I still have it."
Wow.
And yeah.
Wow.
So,
I love
the story there is everybody's human, and even someone that's in royalty. I mean, she was a wonderful person, and she had great empathy for and I don't know why I told her. I just thought, I'm just pulling out the stops. I'm going to tell her I don't want to be here either.
Yeah.
That's
It worked.
It worked.
But now everybody knows. Everybody knows what you told her now.
Yeah, that's true.
Speaking of difficult times, let's move to a lady athlete, Nadia Comaneci.
Yeah,
the little gymnast, always had a smile on her face. But I think you got some information that said life wasn't always roses, was it?
It wasn't. The only joy she had was while she was performing. And I'll never forget, I watched the 76 and the 80 Olympics. I was fascinated by gymnastics, but especially her. She got the first perfect 10 ever. The scoreboard only went to 9.9. So when they put up 1.0, everybody realized she got the perfect 10. She got 6 of them. She won a total of 9 Olympic medals, like 6 of them gold. And she won something that only a few athletes have ever gotten. It's called the Olympic Order. It's the sheath of the Olympic Order. And so I met with her and Bart Connors, her husband, who's an American gymnast. And after I kind of prepped them, and Nadia still spoke kind of broken English. I got up and she goes, "Wait a minute, I have something." And she hands me a jewelry box, a little jewelry box. She goes, "I don't know if you're interested, but I brought these." So I open it up and I'm staring at Olympic history, all of her gold and silver medals and the Olympic order sheath, this great, it's almost like a collar necklace that you wear, but it was broken in 2. All her medals were tarnished, and there were pieces of stale candy in the box. And I said, "Thank you, Nadia." And I said, "Bart, can I talk to you a second?" I go to the hall and I go, "Bart, if I had one of these, I'd have spotlights on it in a case in the entry of my home. What's going on?" He goes, "They're nothing but bad memories for her." I go, "What?" She said, "Well, she was, a gymnast there. She was under a dictator named Ceausescu, and his son, I guess, had put moves on Nadia, and she'd spurned him. So he said they put so much pressure on her, and she was never good enough, as perfect as she was. And when she retired, they wouldn't let her near the gym, wouldn't let her work with any of the gymnasts like she wanted to. So she actually defected from Romania, and Bart said, "Yeah, isn't it interesting? The world saw this big smile and all these gold medals, and there was a little girl that was miserable, that was tortured." And he said, "She's so much happier now." So you never know what somebody's going through, right? And her story reminds me of Matthew 6:19, I think, and 20. It says, "Lay not up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where none of that happens."
That's good.
That's a great analogy. Yeah, I love it.
All the medals, all the trophies, they'll all be tarnished one day and be thrown out.
Yeah.
Well, let's turn this frown upside down and tell us a funny story about Ted Williams.
Ted Williams, man, when I heard I was having him on, I said, are you kidding me? The best pure hitter? I had read his book, and on the cover, he had the strike zone and every baseball and what your average was if you swing at those pitches. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
But he was just a student of hitting. And so I have him on the show, and I said, so Ted, how would you compare the pitching today to when you played? Like for instance, what do you think you'd hit against today's pitching? He goes, I don't know, maybe 275. I said, 275? The last 400 hitter in baseball? Is the pitching that great? And he goes, no, Dan, I'm 75 years old. I about fell off my chair. He said it with such a straight face. If he were playing today. But Ted,
I love it.
You know, he's a great example of finishing strong, our motto. Mm-hmm. He went into the last doubleheader of 1941, and his average was .39955. I think his manager's name was Joe Cronin. And he comes up to me and says, Ted, I'm going to sit you today because your average rounds up to 400. You'll be the first 400 hitter in the last 2 decades. And Ted says, no way I'm sitting. If I can't hit it all the way, I don't deserve it. He went out and went 6 for 8 and ended up at 406. That
nice.
Is finishing strong.
That's right.
That's right there.
Yeah. That's a good one.
Wow. Here's another one that you mentioned to me before, and I know it was an incredible day. You got to spend multiple hours with one of the biggest names in baseball, the big Joe DiMaggio.
The legend.
Had to be unbelievable.
You talk about, I don't think I was ever nervous about meeting anyone or working with them, but I was a little nervous going in to meet him because I'd heard so many stories about he'd walked out on interviews. I knew not to ask him about Marilyn Monroe or his son, Joe Jr. I'd, really done my homework. So he wanted to meet me at 1 p.m. It was on a Sunday. So right after church, I go there, I meet him, and I figure it's going to be a 10-minute meeting. He's going to tell me what's inbounds, what's out of bounds. So I'm going to go home. Well, 6 hours later, the producer comes in, says, guys, I got to get you on the air. We're doing a 3-hour show. So I walk in and I say, Mr. DiMaggio, it's such an honor to meet you. And he goes, call me Joe. And he introduced me to Barry Helper, who was a co-owner of the New York Yankees at the time and had the best baseball collection, I think, in history. The Helper collection sold on Lloyd's of London at the time, I think, for $23 million. He had like a dry cleaner system in his home where you pressed a button and these game-worn jerseys of the greatest players of all time would come by.
Wow.
And so, Joe and I are talking, and once in a while, Barry would jump in and Joe would go, Barry, apologize to Dan. You just interrupted. Sorry, Dan. Here's an owner of the New York Yankees. I mean, when Joe DiMaggio speaks, everybody listens, right? I'm like, this is great. He's telling him to apologize. Yeah, and by the way, give me free tickets, and I give you
right.
Get on the air. Buy this now.
Yeah. So Joe's Mr. DiMaggio, he kept saying, call me Joe. He said, let's talk baseball. I said, one of my favorite subjects. And I'd read a lot of his stories, but to hear him tell them, he told me about his first game as a rookie. The game before, they were playing at Ebbets Field, the Brooklyn Dodgers. And he said, this guy's going around with a megaphone in between every inning saying, make sure you're here tomorrow. The great rookie Joe DiMaggio makes his debut. And he says, the more this guy did it, the more nervous I got. Was really worried. And I said, well, how'd you do? He goes, I was 3 for 3, a triple and 2 singles. I said, so I guess the nerves calmed down. He goes, yeah, after I hit that first base hit, I was okay. And then he told another great story he told me was he started in 36 and 39. Was it 39? I've got it here. No, it was, I think 38. The Yankees put out a press release, and it was in the headlines in the New York papers, DiMaggio in town for contract talks. He said in those days, contract talks where you basically walked in, the owner told you what you were going to make next season, and you left. He said, so I was dealing with Colonel Jacob Rupert, the owner of the Yankees at the time. He goes, I figured I'd start out. So he says, I wasn't even, as I'm sitting down in my chair, I say, Mr. Rupert, I think I'm worth $43,000 next year. He said, I didn't even get $1,000 out. Rupert hits the ceiling, goes, 43,000. What do you think? The young man, Lou Gehrig's been with this ball club 13 years. And do you know how much he makes? And Joe says, no, I don't. He goes, he only makes 41,000 now. What do you think of that? He said, I looked at him and said, I think he's severely underpaid. I said, so Joe, did you get your 43? He goes, not even close. I settled for like 25 or 28,000.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Have times changed, right?
Yeah.
Oh, isn't that the truth? Yeah.
Yeah. But you know what? A story I got to tell you, the 56 game hitting streak. He was under so much pressure because when he got up to around 30, 31, he set the Yankees club record. And then he was going after George Sisler at 41. He got his. Then Wee Willie Keeler, who had 44. He said they kept finding these records. So as you know, it got to 56. The night it ended, Brian, guess where it ended? Cleveland Stadium. Yep. He said the weirdest thing, he said this cab ride to the ballpark that night, the guy didn't say a word to me. And as I paid him, he turned around. He said he had his hair was wild and he had these big eyes. He goes, it ends tonight. The streak ends tonight. And he said, he kind of shook me up. I walked out and I thought, okay, I'm Joe DiMaggio. I'll shake that off. Well, he hit two really hard ground balls down the third baseline. The Indians' third baseman, Ken Keltner, backhanded him, threw him out by like half a step. His third time up, he comes up late in the game. And this happened multiple times during the streak where he didn't get the hit till his last time. Sometimes he'd get, a couple hits, but it was really stressful. And so the last time up, it's a line drive and Lou Boudreau made a jumping catch and the streak was over.
Yeah.
They said, so I decided to walk back to the hotel that night. I didn't feel like another cab ride like that one. And he said, I just walked back and thought about it. And I said, Joe, it's amazing because the next day you went on another 16-game hitting streak. He goes, yeah, I did. And I said, wasn't it hard? I mean, to think about if you had one of those hits had gotten through that night, your streak would have been like, 57 plus 16, 73, 74 games. He goes, never crossed my mind. I go, really? Why not? He goes, because you never look back. If you're thinking about your last turn at the plate, you miss the next one. And life's a lot like that. And reminds me of Paul in Philippians. He says, forgetting those things which are in the past. In Philippians 3:13, I reach forth to what is ahead. I press toward the mark for the prize of the high calling of God in Christ Jesus. And that's how we finish strong. And that's what we've got to do, guys.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, you talked about Kenny Keltner. Let's talk about another third baseman who actually started out as a shortstop, I believe.
Yes.
I remember you telling me that Cal Ripken Jr. was one of your favorite athletes to interview. So tell us why.
One of the nicest guys I've ever met. A true guy that just kept giving and giving back to the game. He actually went to third and then went back to shortstop and set a lot of records at shortstop. He was big and tall at 6'4". And at the same time, there were guys like Garcia Pera, Nomar Garcia Pera, and A-Rod, these bigger third shortstops.
Yeah.
But, the thing everybody remembers Cal as being baseball's Iron Man, and he was. I mean, 2,632 games, that's 17 years of showing up every day for the job and playing.
Unbelievable.
I mean, he blew by, Lou Gehrig was the Iron Horse, and he passed him up and then went on.
We couldn't even get you to be on time for this podcast.
I know.
We don't ask that much.
You
broke the streak. You broke the streak.
Well, guys, I had a broken toenail. I couldn't run as fast as I used to.
Like Chief Wahoo, tonight it is.
Yeah. So Cal, I guess 3 words that would describe him would be dependability, durability, and wholesomeness. He really took being a role model serious. And I tell people all the time, if you want a role model for your kids, Cal Ripken Jr. Not only did he show up every day, he was an amazing player. Yeah. The guy, let's see, I wrote it down. He 2-time American League MVP, 8-time Silver Slugger. He had more home runs than any shortstop in history. And the game that he tied Gehrig's record And the game he beat Gehrig's record, he had a home run in each of those games.
Wow.
And the one thing he told me, he said, I took practice serious. Every ground ball was the last inning of the World Series in practice. Every time at bat was my last at bat. Bases loaded, 3-2 count, 2 outs. I mean, that's how he practiced. And I got to tell you, I've seen him in so many. One time we were covering a spring training down in West Palm Beach, and the Orioles were playing. The game got rained out. So the crew and I are packing up. We're walking up the stadium steps. I look back. There's one player on the field under an umbrella signing autographs, Cal Ripken Jr. All the rookies had left. Everybody else was out of there. I did a show with them at Cal Ripken Baseball Park, the one that's built like Camden Yard, Oriole Park at Camden Yard with the hotel in the outfield. And we're doing this show, and we have a huge crowd. And at the end of it, he and I are out playing catch with this ball. His son came out, and we're tossing a little rubber ball around, and Cal's going, well, I guess I got to go that way. There's only one way out. So he went, and he started signing autographs. I waited for my crew to tear down. We left over an hour and a half later. And when we left, he was still there. He was, and this was like at 11:30 or midnight. And he must have been there till the early hours. He just was that kind of a guy.
Wow.
And just the nicest guy you'd ever meet. Before he even retired, he came to do a show with me. And I worked with Cal a lot. We were buddies. In fact, he asked me if I'd ever be interested in coming down and doing some color for one of his minor league teams. And I'd never got to take him up on it because I was always on the air at QVC.
Yeah.
But he brought me the blueprints for Ripken baseball and what the fields were going to look like and the whole combo. He was so excited to use his skills to teach young people how to play ball the Ripken way.
That is so neat.
That's so neat.
Yeah.
Hey, we're running out of time. Let's finish off just taking a hard right. This is something that's not about an actor or not about an athlete, but you hosted the first television show on the planet of the new millennium, January 1, 2000. That had to be something that's awesome. You'll never forget that, will you?
That and going to 2 Olympic games and going to the Olympics in Sydney, those were the highlight, I think. But yeah, I couldn't believe it. They had John Tesh and I on a beach on the Indian Ocean in Gisborne, New Zealand, which is the city of first light. The sun rises the first place in Gisborne. And so we did John Tesh. I was with a musician, John Tesh, who you guys have met. And he was they had a grand piano. They had this Maori Indian tribe. They had to spend $40,000 just to get the equipment to this place in New Zealand. They had to bring it in by boat. A lot of pressure. I mean, that was probably the most pressure I was on to really deliver well. The day before, New Year's Eve day, 1999, New Year's Eve of 2000, we do a rehearsal at the same time and we had the most beautiful sunrise in the morning. It was beautiful. Everything went perfect. We wake up January 1st, early in the morning, like 4:30, New Zealand time or 4. And, we thought nothing would work. Y2K. I was like, hey, my alarm worked. Hey, maybe we're going to be okay. So we show up and it is pouring rain. I mean, the hardest rain I think I've ever seen. We're in the dark and everybody's like, oh, man, what are we going to do? All this money, all this time. So John and I and a crew member huddled in the corner and prayed. We said, Lord, please, you know what's gone into this. You know how much work. So by the time we started the show, it was still dark and I had an umbrella and it was just lightly sprinkling. And it wasn't like 5 or 10 minutes in, I was able to put the umbrella down and we had the most amazing and even more beautiful sunrise than the day before. Yeah. So, the thing is, prayer works. Pray. The effectual, fervent man of a righteous man prayeth much, availeth much. It accomplishes much. We always have to pray. So, guys, it was a career I never dreamed I'd have. But when God spoke to me when Beth was dying, and I write about that, shameless plug for Hurricane of Love. It's still available on Amazon.
Yeah, definitely.
And even my book, Best Seat in the House, is still on Amazon with a lot of great, if you have a sports lover in your life, sports fan. But when Beth was passing away, all of that seemed to fade in the background. And the Lord just kept moving and speaking to me and dealing with me. And I thought, and you guys remember the Bloomin' Onion Day, and none of us had a clue what this would look like, did we? And here we are 9 years later.
Unbelievable.
We've got a YouTube channel. We've got a Facebook page. We do our morning cups of inspiration. We do short videos. We host a podcast, Finish Strong. We have a radio station, Fearless Faith Radio. And by the way, everybody, it's a free app. Just go to your app store. I have it on my phone. And I think you guys too. Like if I'm waiting in a doctor's office or I'm in line, I listen to great Christian music, or one of us doing an inspirational video or inspirational message. So it's amazing.
It's fun. Yeah. It's been unbelievable, the journey, guys. And Brian, I got to say, the old man didn't do a bad job, did he?
He stayed awake. He stayed awake the whole time. I was a little concerned, but
guys, I think you've given me more compliments tonight than you ever have. So, can I come back as a guest on our podcast again?
No, man, this is it right here.
This is your audition tape.
Over. Yeah, but it has been a blast. It's always fun to work with you guys, Dan. You may be our best guest yet. So, sit on that for a little bit. But we need to shut this thing down.
Well, I just want to say I love you guys. We teach each other a lot, but people always tell me, you read the comments, like they're like, I'm envious of you guys' relationship, that we've been friends for, gosh, I can't do the math. 52 years? Wow.
Yep.
It's crazy, isn't it?
It's getting longer.
Yeah.
It's getting longer by the day.
Yeah.
But one more Finish Strong podcast, and it's been a blast, guys. And we hope you as listeners will join us again for another episode of Finish Strong.
Thank you for listening to Finish Strong. For more information about Finish Strong and Fearless Faith, check out their website, ffaith.org. Make sure that you rate and review this podcast to help more people accomplish their God-given purpose, so that together we can finish strong.